starting this fall on soul yoga, caring for the inner you. And so I'd like to begin this morning by reading to you a couple of verses from one of the most well-known passages in the entire Bible, Psalm 23. Listen for the word of God. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. I think I've told this story before. Some of you may remember, but a number of years ago, I was out in Nepal. I was going to go on a trek in the Himalayas, and I was in Kathmandu, the capital city, trying to get everything ready and together. I got my gear together, and I went to the Kathmandu hotel to have a final nice meal before I went up into the mountains for a couple of weeks. And when I was there waiting for my reservation, I was in the hotel lounge, and there was this big, loud, boisterous group that was laughing, and it was pretty much all centered around this one big, loud, boisterous man who was regaling everyone with these stories. And before long, when they saw that I was by myself, they invited me to come and join them. And it turned out that this group was none other, let's see, there it is. This big man was none other than Sir Edmund Hillary, the man who was the first to ever climb Mount Everest with his Sherpa Tenzing Narge. And they were just telling all these stories. It was fascinating and wonderful to meet this man, and he was there for a BBC documentary that was being done. It was at a time when there was a lot of questions being asked about justice issues for the Sherpas. I mean, for many years, these people had put their safety at risk, their own lives at risk. Many of them had died for the whims of these wealthy Western mountaineers who wanted to climb the mountain. And in fact, for many years, I guess, when they talked about how many people had died on Mount Everest, they only talked about the Westerners. They never included in those numbers all of the Sherpas that had died trying to help these people get to the top of the mountain. And so Sir Edmund Hillary was there in Nepal to do this documentary, talk about his climb, but also to talk about his lifelong friendship with this beloved Sherpa who had been a big part of his life and whom they had conquered Everest together. And one of the stories that he told that I will never forget is he was telling stories about the Sherpas, and he said that very often, to the frustration of all these Westerners, as they were going along, they'd be having these kind of grueling treks, and they go for days at a time, miles and miles, and then all of a sudden, all the Sherpas one day would just sit down on the ground, put all the packs down, all the gear down, and would refuse to budge another inch. And it didn't matter what they did. They could promise to pay them more. They wouldn't move. They could threaten that they weren't going to pay them the money they had promised them. They wouldn't move. There was nothing they could do. And when they asked why these Sherpas wouldn't move, invariably what they told them is, we need a chance for our souls to catch up to our bodies. We need a chance for our souls to catch up to our bodies. I don't think I need to do a whole lot of convincing of you that we are too busy in this world. We've said this before, that we have gotten to a point in our society where we worship at the altar of busyness. And we measure our value and our worth as human beings by how fast we're moving and how much we're doing and how we perform and what we're able to accomplish and achieve. I also don't think I have to try very hard to convince you that this busyness, this inherent busyness that is a part of who we are, a part of what we hold up as a deep value of our society, it leaves us completely exhausted. Studies have been done that show that adults are getting a lot less sleep now than just a generation ago. There's studies that have shown that our children are actually getting about 25% less sleep than they were just a generation ago. This leaves us tired and depleted and exhausted. Of course, there are different kinds of exhaustion, right? Back a number of years ago when I used to do these lifeguard triathlons, Every time I did one, I would come across the finish line. I had spent everything I had. I would collapse onto the ground, just exhausted. My body told me in 1,000 different ways that I was not going to go one more inch. In fact, I was always so grateful that in the local paper they would put pictures like this of me in the paper instead of a picture they could have just as easily taken of me having crossed the finish line down on all fours, hands and knees, just throwing up in front of the entire crowd of everybody who was there. But there is a kind of exhausted and a kind of rest that we need. In the same way that there's different kinds of exhaustion, there are different kinds of rest, aren't there? When I work late at night, the nights that I have meetings, especially the nights when I don't have a chance to go home in between the meetings, I'll come home at 9 or 10 at night starving, go and grab some food, and then I go into our den and I just sort of collapse in a corner of our sofa and I allow my body to just kind of ooze and melt into the corner of that sofa, pretty much horizontal, almost comatose, with just my head propped up just enough so that I'm able to eat my food and to watch the mindless show that I put on TV. And I guess that's a kind of rest, isn't it? I mean, there's a time when we need for our bodies and our minds to just check out. There's other kinds of things that we do that we consider restful, whether it's listening to beautiful music or spending time with dear friends or reading a good book, going out and having a meal with people. Those of you who were at Wine in the Word last night, oh my gosh, thank you for being a part of that. A huge gathering, about 65 of us over at Ken Larson's. It was a wonderful time to be together, a very renewing time. Or maybe you like to go out into nature. The Waves in the Word were just an amazing time as we would sit on the beach and watch these beautiful sunsets together. There's a lot of different kinds of ways to relax and to rest. Even it seems kind of paradoxical, but sometimes our rest takes the form of exerting our bodies incredibly hard, right? We go out for a run or a hike or go to the gym or we do a yoga class. There's so many different kinds of exhaustion and there's so many different kinds of rest. But what I want to talk to you today about is a sort of fatigue that wrecks our lives. And I think it is so pervasive in our age and our society here, especially on the west side of Los Angeles. And it is what I will call soul fatigue. Our souls get tired. Now, the best definition I've ever seen of soul fatigue comes out of a John Ortberg book that he wrote on the soul, and it's kind of a long section, but if you bear with me, I'd like to read this to you. John Ortberg says, when we stay up too late and rise too early, when we try to fuel ourselves for the day with coffee and a donut in the morning and a Red Bull in the afternoon, when we refuse to take time to exercise and we eat foods that clog our brains and our arteries, when we constantly try to guess which line at the grocery store will move faster, and which car in which lane at the stoplight will move faster, and which parking space is closest at the store, our bodies grow weary. Add to that the kind of fatigue that attacks the mind. When we're bombarded all day by information at work, when multiple screens are always clamoring for our attention, when we carry around a mental list of errands not yet done, bills not yet paid, emails not yet replied to, when we try to push unpleasant emotions under the surface like holding beach balls under the water at a swimming pool, our minds grow weary. And then there's the fatigue that attacks the will. We have so many decisions to make. We try to decide what clothes will create the best possible impression, which foods will bring us the most pleasure, which tasks at work will bring us the most success, which entertainment options will make us the most happy, which people we dare to disappoint, which events we must attend, even what vacation destination will bring the most enjoyment. The need to make decisions overwhelms us. The sheer length of the menu at Cheesecake Factory oppresses us, and we grow weary. I mean, take any one of those things and it's exhausting, but you put them together and it begins to pull us away from the things that matter most in our lives, doesn't it? It cuts us off from friends, from people, from life itself, from God, from ourselves. The symptoms, as we look, there's so many. We get bothered too easily by the things that happen to us, things that we shouldn't be bothered by. I mean, there's a difference between being busy and being hurried, isn't there? And busyness is a condition of the body. It's an outward condition. We're all busy. You can't live in the United States, in the west side of Los Angeles, without being a busy person. But that's not the same thing as being hurried, right? Hurried is an inward condition. It's a condition of the soul. It's when I am incapable of being fully present in any given moment. I am incapable of being fully there with people and in places and in situations. We look at Jesus. Jesus was very often busy, but he was never hurried, right? He was always able to be there with people in the moment, whatever was going on. He was there. This fatigue of the soul, it makes it hard for us to make simple decisions. The simplest things we get overwhelmed by. When we have a fatigue of the soul, our judgment goes out the window. We begin falling for impulsive things that aren't good for us. And we start to lose the courage that we need to face life. I was going to ask Willie in the first service, but he wasn't here, if it was true that Vince Lombardi was the one who used to always say, fatigue makes cowards out of us all. You look at the disciples, and isn't that exactly what happened? I mean, here are these men who went on to be beaten for Christ, shipwrecked, thrown in prison, crucified upside down. And yet on that night, when they were exhausted, on that final night, they couldn't even bring themselves to say they knew Christ. That is what fatigue does to us. That is what this fatigue of the soul is all about. There is a rest. It was designed and created and put into our DNA that was meant to nurture the soul. I don't believe that God made the commandment and brings it up over and over again and modeled it to us. I mean, do you think really that in Genesis, when God creates the world, that on the seventh day he was as exhausted as I am when I come home from work and he needed to just veg out comatose on the sofa? I don't think so. I think the reason that he brings up this seventh day of rest is as a model for us to tell us that this is what we need in order to restore and refresh and renew the deepest part of us that can't be rested just by sleeping or watching TV or vegging on the couch. That there is a part of us that needs a certain kind of renewal. At home, we have this Mac computer in our bedroom, and sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night when this computer turns itself on and starts making all of these weird noises. It goes as it defrags itself, right? I mean, what is this defragmenting? It's an interesting process, isn't it? It's when your computer turns itself on in order to take its memory, all of the information that's in there, and just kind of systematically pick it apart and move it around and put it back together and reconnect the pieces and make the right links and put things in an organized fashion so that it all makes sense, so that your computer doesn't slow down and clog up and eventually crash, right? Well, for all the information that we have stored on that computer, inside our minds and our hearts and our souls is 1,000 times more. And how much more does our soul, does our being need to be defragged? Do we need those pieces to be pulled apart and put back together and the right links to be made and the right way to look at these things and for us to spend time thinking about why we're here and who we are and what's important and what we're doing here in the first place? Abraham Herschel put it like this. He said, 6 days a week, we wrestle with the world. wringing profit from the earth. On the Sabbath, we especially care for the seed of eternity planted in our soul. The world has our hands, but our souls, they belong to someone else. Do you all take time? Do you all take time to stop and to rest? To do absolutely nothing, to move inward and rest in God's presence, to allow yourselves to think about the big questions, to allow yourselves to pull apart and put back together all of the various strands inside of your life so that it makes sense, so that it's whole, so it's holistic, so your soul can be centered and alive and fully adjusted. My friend Jim Burns is going to be coming to speak at a weekend retreat here in the spring, and I could not be more excited. I hope every single one of you will come. Not only is he the world-renowned top authority in youth ministry all over the world, he's now become one of the top authorities on relationships and generally has a radio program that millions of people listen to, but beyond that, he's one of the most engaging and dynamic and deep speakers I have ever heard. He's hilarious. He's so much fun. I hope you all will be here. But one of the things he used to always say anytime he was speaking about spirituality, about issues of the soul, is his urging of all of us to take at least 4 half-days a year. 4 half-days to go and find some beautiful place where you can be totally quiet and feel connected to God, whether that's down at the beach, which is what he loves to do, up in the mountains, at a park, anywhere where you can just spend some quiet time feeling close to God, to bring nothing but a Bible, a journal, and a pen, and then to spend at least 4 hours. He says it takes at least 4 hours to be able to pray and to read the Bible and to write in your journal and just think and just allow God to speak to you and to feel all of the different feelings that run around inside of us that we constantly are pushing under the surface. Jim says that we've got to take this time to get away and be alone and spend time with God on a regular basis. And he's not in bad company, because this is what we often see Jesus telling his disciples to do as well. All through the Gospels, we see Jesus urging his disciples to stand apart. At one point in Matthew 11, he says to them, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and heavily burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest." What does he say? "For your souls." Now, I get it. It's not easy. Now, I know that as soon as I find myself alone for any amount of time, I start getting antsy, and that's a sure sign that your soul needs some tending if you can't be alone with yourself for any amount of time without starting to feel antsy. And yet the reality is that when I spend that alone kind of time, there are things that I push down under the surface that are deep in my subconscious, which I don't normally think about, and they all seem to bubble up, the sad things in my life, and the things that I'm disappointed about, and the people that I have broken relationships with that are not happy with me, or I'm not happy with them, the losses in my life, and all of those questions, the questions that sometimes I don't even dare ask because I'm so scared that there isn't going to be a real answer for. It's only in facing those things, it's only in spending time with those things that we're going to make the connections and figure out the strands and get to a place where our souls can be whole and alive again. On the last day of the first trip I ever took with Summit Adventure, this Christian outdoor adventure organization, kind of like a Christian Outward Bound that I've talked about before and I've worked closely with through the years. The last day we had a group of about 70 high school students, and the last day they were going out to do a 24-hour solo experience completely by themselves on their own little part of the mountain. And so we were going to drop each one off in their own area of the mountain, and all they were allowed to bring with them was their sleeping bag, their water bottle, their flashlight, and then their Bible, journal, and pen. And they were going to spend 24 hours all through the night and into the next day completely by themselves. And so I was helping my high school students pack. I mean, talk about stepping out of your comfort zone. I was getting them all ready for this when all of a sudden the leaders of Summit Adventure came up to me and said, well, are you ready to go as well? And I said, well, no, of course not. I'm not going. This is the kids. I'm the leader of this group. I need to be here. If there's an emergency, I need to be here. I need to help with whatever. And they said, no, we really don't need you at all, Dave. What we need you to do is go and do this with your kids. It's like, oh, okay. And so they dropped me off on my own little ridge up on top of the mountain. And it was this beautiful area, an area about as big as this room. And at the end, it was a big ledge, a cliff looking out over the most amazing view. But as soon as I was dropped off, I started feeling antsy. I started feeling a little bit nervous. I didn't have any of the things that normally distract me. My computer, my books, my smartphone, any of the stuff that usually keeps my mind racing 1,000 miles an hour, and it was just me. And so the first thing I did is I thought, okay, right, I'm gonna set this place up so it's a good place for me to spend the night. And so I found the perfect spot where I was gonna sleep, and I took a pine branch and I cleaned off the area and I set up my sleeping bag. I found a rock that looked like it could be a bedside table, and I put it next to the bag, and I put my journal and my Bible and my flashlight and water bottle on it, and I got it all set up, and that took me about 20 or 30 minutes. So then I walked over and I sat down on the edge of this cliff and I just looked out over the beautiful, beautiful expanse. It was just gorgeous. It was the view, the clouds, the mountains, the trees. I listened to the birds, and it was wonderful. And that took another 20 minutes, I think. So then I pulled out my Bible and I started reading my Bible. I remember I read Ephesians, and then I read Philippians, and then I read 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and then I read the entire Gospel of John, and then I started reading Proverbs when I realized, I'm actually sick of reading the Bible. That was about 2 hours later. And so I put the Bible down, and I just sat there, and I prayed, and I thought about the things that I normally think about when I have a chance to sit down and think about stuff. Probably did that for about an hour. At the end of the time, I was like, I have no idea how I'm going to survive this. I had about 19 and a half hours left. And I didn't know what to do. But it was at that very moment that all of a sudden the strangest things started to happen. All of a sudden, all these thoughts and these feelings that had been pressed deep, deep down that I'd forgotten about, that I hadn't thought about in years, started to slowly creep back into my consciousness. Started to bubble up from somewhere deep inside that I hadn't visited, I hadn't recognized in years. And before I knew it, suddenly my mind was alive, and my mind was racing with all of these thoughts of things, some sad things, some exciting things, some things about who I really wanted to be and what I thought was important in life and why I thought I was here and who I wanted to become in the short time that I have here. There was so much going on, and by the time the sun was setting, I felt like my soul was alive. It wasn't all easy, but it was all very, very real, and it was tapping into things that I hadn't recognized were there in so long. By the time it was midnight, you have to understand, when they dropped me off, I didn't know how I was going to survive for 24 hours by myself. But by the time it was midnight, I didn't want to fall asleep. I was getting tired. My eyelids were beginning to droop. But I didn't want to fall asleep because I thought there wasn't going to be enough time. I need to make it really clear that God never expects us to be the ones to heal our own souls, to defrag our own lives. All God has ever asked us to do is to make the space, is to set aside that time, to set apart that space so that God can come and do the restoring and the refreshing and the renewing. I forgot to show you my picture of me up in my little corner of the mountain. But I think this passage that we read at the beginning of the sermon says it all. I mean, it really shows us that God doesn't expect us to be the healer. God expects us to find the places, to set aside the time, to eke out that time in our life so that God can do the renewing. When he says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul." Where are your green pastures? What are your still waters? Is it doing a daily quiet time where you spend some time reading the Bible and praying every single morning? Is it following what Jim Burns' advice and finding 4 times a year where you can take 4 hours to go off completely by yourself to some quiet, solitary place and just pray and think and read and write? Is it going off for a silent retreat at Viermo or for a 24-hour solo experience on the side of a mountain? Whatever it is, whatever you need, whatever that place is for you, please, wouldn't it be the most ridiculous thing in this world if you took the short span of, 80, 90, 100 years, 50 years, whatever it is that you have on this planet, and you were moving so fast, skipping from thing to thing, going so fast on the surface of everything that you never took the chance to really sink down deep and to allow your soul to connect to the deepest things about who you are and why you were made and why you were here. Whatever you need to do, set apart that time and allow God to be the one who restores your soul. Amen.